In this video, we're going to continue on with modeling more in our dishes file. In the previous lesson, we went over how to create a plate by starting off with a cylinder, manipulating its shape, and then using the connect tool to make some extra loops that we then used to move things into the correct shape. We then used bevel and the hard, soft edge to make some finalized details on it. For this next one, we're going to create a bowl. So the first thing we do want to do is we do want to hide our previous plate. We don't want to delete it because we do just want all of our dishes eventually to be in this file. So I'm just going to select the plate in the outliner and hit the H key on the keyboard. The H key will hide it for us. You can see that it dimmed it in the outliner, so it's kind of like a dimmer look to it. And we can always bring it back by selecting it in the outliner and hitting H again. This is why it's really helpful to make sure that we are naming our assets so that we can easily hide and unhide things as we want. So we're going to do a very simple bowl, but again, we are going to want to start off with a shape that is close to what the final is going to be. And, again, we probably only want to work with either a sphere, a box, a cylinder, or a plane. And to me, it seems like the closest shape to a bowl is actually going to be the sphere. So let's click on our sphere to start creating our bowl. So I'm going to click on the sphere and I'm going to go to the channel box and I'm going to change the inputs of the sphere to get it closer to what we need. So the base radius of 1 centimeter is not really going to work since that would just be a 2 centimeter wide bowl. It's a little bit too small. So let's bump this up to maybe, let's do like 6 centimeters so that the diameter across would then be about 12 centimeters. So, a little bowl, but that'll work for what we're doing. I also want to change the subdivision axes and height from the default 20 to maybe a 24. Actually, let's do the subdivision height from, let's actually drop it down to maybe a 16. We don't need quite so many. So if we look, we're only going to be using half of it, but we do want to keep it a nice number so that we can cut it directly in half. So if we did like a 15, it would be hard to do half of a sphere because we can see that it's, there's no line right in the middle. So we're just going to set with 16 for the subdivision height and have the subdivision axis by set to 24. Normally, I would want to change the height baseline to a -1 so that it's sitting nicely on there. But for now, I'm actually going to keep it at 0 because it's going to make the next couple of steps that we're going to do a little bit easier to have the pivot point in the center. It will eventually get moved to the bottom. In fact, while I'm here, I do know that since the radius is 6, if I translate the y up by 6, I know that the bottom of it will be sitting on the origin so that later I can make sure that the bottom of the bowl is sitting there. So that should be it as far as our adjustments over in the channel box. So now that we have the basics of our bowl set, let's go ahead and name this bowl. The next step is going to be to get this to be a little bit more bowl shaped. And the way that we're going to do that is by deleting half of it. The easiest way to do this is going to be to go to a side view. So I'm going to tap on my spacebar on the keyboard and then go to either the front or side. It honestly doesn't matter so that I can see it nicely in this view. I'm then going to go to the modeling toolkit, select the face select, and I'm going to make sure that my camera base selection is off because I'm going to click and drag a box so I can select the top half of this. Notice that I'm being very liberal with my box. I'm not trying to get super close to be like right on top of it. You don't need to do that. You can be, fairly large as long as you're not going too far of what you want to select. So don't waste your time trying to get like pixel perfect right to the edge because it's not really helpful to do that. Try to, be be quicker with how you do your selections. Like don't worry about drawing large boxes as long as you're not putting those boxes in spaces you don't need. I can then tap the spacebar again to go back to the perspective view just to double check that I have the correct stuff selected before I hit the delete key on the keyboard to delete that half. So looking at this, you might think, oh, this is going to be perfectly fine. This is good enough. But there's two things that are wrong with this. One, this is way too thin for a bowl. There's absolutely no thickness to this bowl. It would be very strange if we just had a bowl sitting like that on our table with absolutely no thickness to it. Two is that we're going to learn a new property about our faces. So if you were unaware, faces, triangles, polygons, however you want to call them, are only one-sided. If you see in Maya how the inside of this is black, that actually means that we're seeing the backside of our polygons. If we were to export this out into a game engine like Unreal or Unity, it would look transparent on this side because we're looking at the back sides of our polygons. So we can see the nice shading on this side means that this is the front of the polygon and this is the back of the polygon. Another way we can see this a little bit better, if you're not quite certain if you are seeing the back side of your polygons or not, is if you have the object selected, we can go underneath mesh, let's see, display polygons, so display polygons, and if you select back face culling, it'll then turn it off. So Maya's trying to be nice and helpful by having the back of those polys be black so that it, you know, if we're working with some very thin stuff, like this is really hard to see. But this is what it would look like then if we were to import it into a game engine, which is absolutely not correct. To make this work, you do have to have the object selected in order for us to be able to turn on back face culling. But let's turn it back on or back off. So I'm going to have it selected, go to display polygons and turn back face culling back off so we can see it. So we're going to solve this then by creating another inner part of the bowl, and then we're going to turn all of those faces inside out so that it's facing the other way. So this is why we didn't move the pivot point to the origin, to make this next step easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the bowl at the object level. With the bowl selected, I'm going to hit Control D on my keyboard to duplicate it. It's really important that you use Control D. You can also find it underneath Edit, Duplicate. You do not want to do a copy and a paste. That does a slightly different action, and that's not what we want to do. We want to do a duplicate. I'll show you what it does. Don't actually do it in your copy of it because I don't want it to get too messy. But if we hit Control C to copy and Control V to paste, we can see it makes this strange, weird group. And we don't really want to mess with that. We don't want to deal with weird groups and stuff like that. So doing a duplicate is going to be a better method for what we want to do. So now that we have our secondary bowl, we need to make it a little bit smaller, and then we're going to flip those normals. So we're going to do that actually with the scale tool. This is one of the instances where using the scale tool will actually come in handy, because I mentioned in a previous video not to use scale to adjust the size. That means that we shouldn't be using the scale tool to adjust the size if we need it to be a specific size, since it is slightly arbitrary. This is a situation where we're scaling this because we're kind of doing it based on looks, based on other objects that we have. So I'm going to make sure that that new duplicated bowl is selected with the scale tool. And I'm going to click and drag on the yellow box in here so that we're scaling in all directions. But since the pivot point is right in the center, it's going to stay even with the top of the bowl. So I'm going to click and drag. And we can see that we're making kind of like a nice interval. We don't want it to be too fat of a bowl. It doesn't need to be that thick. Maybe, you know, again, kind of just eyeballing it, maybe something like right about there. And that would be a pretty good thickness. So the next step is going to be to make all these polys face the other way. And we're going to do that with a tool underneath our mesh display called reverse. So the way that this works is we're going to go ahead and we're going to select, I'm going to click and drag all of our polys so that they're selected. Again, make sure the camera base selection is off so we have them all selected. And then we're going to go to mesh display and we're going to do a reverse. And we can see that it instantly looks a little bit different. Let me deselect this now. So we can see that it is nice on the inside and also on the outside. In fact, this is one of the tools along with the hardness, softness underneath the mesh display that I use a lot. Those are the three that I tend to come in here to use is the reverse, harden edge, soften edge. So, and I've covered this in a previous video, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put these in my custom shelf. I do have another video that talks about exactly how to do a custom shelf, but let's go ahead and add these since these are tools that we're going to use a lot and we don't want to have to go in and dig them out all the time. There we go. All right, so we have our first bowl, which is the outside, and our second bowl, which is the inside. We now need to combine these together into a single mesh. So I'm going to select one of them, get the select tool, select one of them, hold shift, select the next one. I'm going to come over here and click combine. So it will automatically combine them together, but I kind of want to go into one of the settings. So don't just click on it, hold shift and then click on combined. That way it'll pull up these combined options because we can be smart about this and it will allow us to put our pivot position then on the bowl at the world origin. Remember how I moved up that first sphere by 6 centimeters so that the bottom is technically touching the world origin? By making sure this is selected, I'll make sure that the combined mesh will automatically have that pivot then at that world origin, and I won't have to fix it later. Then I'm going to hit apply, and I can close this. So now we see that we have a single mesh, but we do have kind of all this weird garbage stuff up here. This is kind of remnants of, you know, these, you can see it's bowl and bowl one. These are kind of remnants of the previous individual assets that we combined into bowl two. But we really don't want to keep this around. If we don't clean this up, it could cause problems later. But we can't just delete them because if we delete them, it can delete our object. It can make things go pretty haywire. So let's go ahead and clean this up. And this is actually something that I would recommend as you 3D model, not just combining things, but every once in a while you're going to want to do this because it kind of cleans up all the weird history that you end up getting underneath like the channel box. Like you'll start to see like these inputs start to get really long. And if you don't clean this up every once in a while, it can cause problems with how your 3D model acts when you're trying to adjust it. So what we're going to do, we're going to select all of these. We're going to go underneath edit, delete all by type, history. And then we can see that it made that all disappear. In fact, I use that a lot. I do also like to put that on my custom shelf. You can find it here as well. It's this delete by type history. It's this little button here. But generally, as I get more stuff on my custom shelf, I might end up just getting rid of this bar at the top. I do that a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and create a Whoops. Shortcut for that so that it can live down here, and I can use that. Let me do it again. There we go. If for some reason you do the delete history and you feel you did it correctly, but you still have some of those weird garbagey groups up there, as long as you deleted the history, you can go ahead and then just delete out all that garbage, and it shouldn't cause any problems. Sometimes it doesn't fully get cleaned up, but we don't need to keep those in there. I do want to go ahead and rename this just back to bowl, since it is just a singular bowl. Now, next we have a slight problem. We have a gap between these two now, and that looks kind of weird, like that's not how bowls work. Luckily, there's a very easy tool that we can use that's going to clean this up for us, and that is the bridge tool right here. The way that we do this is, now that they're combined, we can select both of these loops. So I'm just going to double click, then I'm going to hold shift and double click again, and then I'm going to click on the bridge tool. And oops, it looks like it kind of got off a little bit. You see that? This happens sometimes where it wasn't quite sure, because that's really messy. We don't want to do that. Didn't quite know what to do, so we're going to undo that real quick. If that does happen, we can just do a few one at a time. So I'm going to click on one edge, hold shift, and click on the bridge. And then let's see now if I double click this edge, if it'll let me bridge it. There, nope. It was unsmart with that. So it does happen sometimes. Let's do it this way. Let's do a few at a time. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, but this one isn't too bad. So we're just going to select a few. So we don't want it. Actually, you know what? This will do it. I'm going to double click so it selects all the way around. But the problem is that selecting the loop also selected these ends, and that's why it's, let me show you again. Notice there's no actual like edge between these, and that's really sloppy. We don't want that. We can fix this by just deselecting these ends. So I'm going to hold down Control and then deselect by clicking on these ends like that. Let's try that bridge again. There we go. Nice clean edge flow. And we're all connected back up. So a couple more things. One of the things I do want to kind of fix is the fact that it's a little bit, you know, it's a bowl, but this is a very round bowl. It would be nice to make it a little bit less like a half circle and like kind of push it down a little bit more. So it's, you know, not quite so round. Since if this was actually sitting on a surface, it would probably just be kind of teetering and falling over. So we can do this, you know, by using our soft selection, because it would be very tedious. I'm going to go to a side view to do this. It's like to come in and like grab a row and push it down and grab a row and push it down. It would work. We would have to kind of eyeball it to make sure that we're squashing it nicely. But you know, that's kind of work that we really don't need to do. So instead, I'm going to select those top vertices. I'm going to go over to soft selection and turn it on. The way this works is that anything that is yellow means it's getting the full force of the move. And as it goes down in color, it's getting less and less. And we can adjust this right here by, if this is, you know, we need it to be a little bit stronger further down, we could set this up higher to like a 10. But we don't really want it pushing on that bottom one, so that's a little bit too much. You can always make it weaker if you want to go a little bit slower, but honestly, I feel like that 5 was a pretty good level. I'm just going to grab this and start pushing it down, and we can see it's starting to make it a little bit more squatter in a nicer way. I do want to be mindful that, and that's why I'm doing it from here, is we have to make sure that we're adjusting both the inside and the outside. We're not accidentally just adjusting the outside and keeping the inside, because then it could look really strange. Let's kind of push it just a little bit more. I'm then going to maybe select just a little bit further, just to kind of squat the bottom some. And that's looking pretty good. That's looking closer to like how a bowl should be shaped. And always remember to turn off your soft selection. This is one of those common things that happens where people will forget that it's on and they'll be like, why is it looking so strange? Like, why is my selection yellow or magenta? Most likely it's because soft selection was still on. The last thing we need to do is to do a bevel. So, because again, we have a hard edge that looks kind of strange. So let's give it a little bit of a softer edge. So I'm just going to double click. This should be review from the previous video. I'm going to select both at the same time. I'm going to click on bevel. And just like before, for the size we're working at, that 0.5 is actually working pretty well. So we're just going to keep it on the settings it suggests. We do need to fix that hard soft edge because it does look, it does look a little bit weird. Generally, when you bevel something like that edge was by default a hard edge. When it gets beveled, the beveled edges will also be hard. So we can easily come in here and double click, hold shift, double click. Get those last two, holding down shift, double click, and the last one. This is why I put it on my custom shelf, the soften edge. Again, though, it's underneath mesh display soften edge. I'm going to click on that. And let's deselect and see how we're looking. There we go. Looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and turn our plate back on. So now I'm going to actually move the plate to the side and we have our bowl and we're moving along. In the next lesson, we'll learn some more tools. So make sure that you kind of practice with the things that we learned today, which is duplicating assets, making sure we know which way our polygons are facing and fixing it if we need to, doing a combine to combine assets into a single asset, using the history cleanup to make sure that we're not leaving any garbage behind, and then just doing a quick bridge and bevel to finish that off.